two of the Brussels attackers were brothers, one believed to have died at the airport, the other in the attack on the subway system. But this is hardly the first time that we've seen family members carry out acts of terror. In fact, it appears to be a disturbing trend. Here to talk about it, a former Islamic extremist who spent 4 years in an Egyptian prison and has since reformed. Maajid Nawaz is the co-founder and chairman of the think tank Quilliam and author of Radical: My Journey Out of Islamist Extremism. Good evening to you, Maajid.
Good evening.
You look at this trend of family members operating in these terror cells. Why are they recruiting siblings, particularly these cases where, in this most recent case in Brussels, where brothers were acting together?
Yes, Sandra, I mean, I can speak of this with some experience. When I joined the Islamist organization that I did at 16 years old, I also joined alongside my older brother and my two cousins. All of us who grew up together, we went in the same direction and only later split. At the early stages of radicalization and the recruitment process, this is often the case because groups of young men, and often these days also young women, feel more affinity to each other, and their bonds of blood or friendship or kinship are closer to each other than they are with wider society. And that's because of the state of disintegration that currently exists across Europe with regards to European Muslims and their status vis-a-vis mainstream society.
But so their upbringing has a lot to do with it, and the upbringing, the things that they have in common. But your point is also that once they're acting together, that there's a trust involved, and fear of infiltration is one of the biggest concerns of these terrorists. That too is a reason why siblings and family members are getting together.
Yes, I mean, you're incredibly unlikely to betray your own brother or your own cousin or your childhood friend who you've grown up with. That's one factor. I think it is important to mention that the first generation, the parents, often subscribe to an incredibly different version of Islam to those who become radicalized in the second and third generations. But those younger, the youth who've grown up together have their own experiences with wider society. They don't feel part of European society. They don't feel part of the societies of their parents' countries of origin. And that identity crisis they all go through together. So it's a shared experience. I think it is also important to mention, however, that's the beginning of the radicalization process. Once the ideological indoctrination kicks in, 2-3 years down the line, then the recruit could potentially betray anyone for the sake of the ideology. We have examples of ISIS people killing their own mothers in Raqqa when they're ordered to by ISIS as an organization. So once the ideological indoctrination is there, loyalty is with the group above and beyond everything else.
When you mentioned ISIS, there's a different trend there even than just brothers and siblings getting together. You mentioned women. ISIS, all are involved. We see parents and children and siblings and aunts and uncles, and as you mentioned, cousins. Everyone's involved when it comes to ISIS. This is much different than what we've seen in the past.
Yes, and one of the reasons for that is for decades in Europe, the Islamist ideology has reigned unchecked in some of these communities. There have been no real efforts to challenge it, and of course, because they shout the loudest and threaten the most, they've come to dominate the discourse. And so families, in those cases where they've joined ISIS, they've been for decades growing up on a diet of romanticizing the notion of the return of a caliphate. So when ISIS audaciously declared that they had resurrected this so-called caliphate, by that time, these are families that have been for sometimes 10-15 years waiting for that glorious moment of moving to the utopian state where God's law will be implemented. And actually this points to the urgency of us beginning to get to grips with challenging the Islamist ideology on the grassroots, which we can't even name the problem at the moment, let alone challenge it.
And that's the challenge. And you have spoken many times to this, that prevention is the key, because it is so hard to come out of it as you did. You were an example of that. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Good to have you, Maajid.
Thank you, Sandra.